Would you like to be somebody who understands why you are responsible for the DNA and essentially the life and well-being of your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren? Then listen to this entire video where I explain how, depending on the decisions and experiences you are subjected to, the environmental stimuli you're subjected to in life, your DNA is influenced by that and is either damaged or nurtured, let's say, in an oversimplistic way. And you hand that DNA down then to your children. You basically package the DNA depending on your life and then hand that down to your offspring. And that has a divine element to it because it means you're influencing your entire family tree across time. And when you do that, you influence the entire world across time. So before we get into this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to learn more about self-development, dating, Jungian psychology, and how to reduce suffering in life. Let's get into it. So I've made several videos on understanding the divine elements potentially within humans. And in the Bible, I believe the first few lines, or eventually somewhere in the first few, the first story of Genesis, God decides to create man in the image of God, of himself. So there is clearly some divine elements of human nature. But what element makes us mortal humans somewhat compatible with something divine, omnipresent, omnipotent, like God? I mean, we're not really conditioned to see this. Like, it feels strange to say it, but this godlike element of human consciousness or human nature. And I'm going to try and explain why we actually have that divine element. So epigenetics is an explanation for why every decision, every experience you have influences the entire world across time. So humans have the power to change the fate of humanity with a single decision now and into the future. So our choices are omnipresent across time. So here is why your decisions and experiences are conducive to influencing the DNA of your children and the rest of your genetic family tree. So some people conceive the idea of DNA genetics as something very stagnant, like you have the DNA and that's it. And depending on what DNA you have, your looks manifest themselves, your behavior manifests itself, etc. Of course, that's the sort of the nature versus nurture discussion, that nature believes that your entire fate and behavior, your looks, is sort of predetermined, not necessarily your fate, but that your looks, your behavior, your personality is predetermined by your DNA, and nurture states that the manifestation of your personality and behavior is simply a consequence of the environment you are subjected to. But it's really a combination of both in reality, nature and nurture, I think. Okay, so some people, as I said, conceive the DNA as being something very stagnant, yet different sections of your DNA are activated at different times, depending on the environmental stimuli you are subjected to. So depending on what you experience, whether you grow up in Germany, if you grow up in the United States, your DNA will be activated in different ways. Different parts of your DNA sequence will be activated, and that will lead to different manifestations of behavior and also the way you look. Like identical twins, for example, have identical DNA, yet as they grow older, their physical manifestations begins to change more and more. So they're identical twins, but they're not perfectly identical. They're not like symmetrical to one another. So epigenetics is the study of looking at how DNA is influenced by something beyond the genome, something that lies within the environment that influences the DNA. So it believes that that the DNA does not determine everything about how you manifest your behavior and personality. So the epigenome is something that lies above the genome. It is the bridge between the environment and your DNA. So if the DNA is here, and then the environment is everything around here. Above it is the epigenome, which is the bridge between the environment and the DNA. Depending on the environmental stimuli, the epigenome commands which sections of the DNA are activated and which sections remain quiescent, so idle. Then the track record, basically, I mean, let's give some examples. Maybe depending on what diet you consume, like if it's a very healthy one versus a very, let's say, unhealthy one, your DNA will respond to it differently, and different parts of your DNA will be activated as a consequence of the different diet you consume, you subject yourself to. Now, then the track record of your DNA, so everything your DNA has experienced, it's like a storage facility of the story of your life is in your DNA, kind of, and depending on which sections of the DNA were activated and which were idle, that is stored into your story, which is in your DNA, which is like remembered by your DNA. It's the memory of your DNA. And depending on, let's say, whether it was damaged, you know, some stimuli damage your DNA and some don't damage the DNA. And depending on that package, that storage package, is transferred to your offspring into their DNA. And then basically the environmental stimuli that you experience is remembered within the configuration of your offspring's DNA and their offspring's DNA and their offspring's DNA, so long into your family tree. So hence your diet, your stressful way of life, the social factors you experience, or the financial level of well-being, they all influence the genetic manifestation of your remaining genetic family tree. And that is a mind-blowing realization, because that means the fate of your family tree depends and is influenced by every single decision you take in life. And that's, first of all, that's quite a frightening realization, because it means you're responsible for a lot of humans, but it's also a eye-opening one, because it makes you respect yourself and, let's say, think twice about your actions, and which I don't necessarily think makes you anxious and, let's say, hypersensitive, but it just makes you more conscious, I would say. And of course, when I was thinking about this, the question arises, well, what's the best way to live? Which environmental stimuli are conducive to well-being and which lead to destruction, you know, or to suffering? That's an excellent question, which I unfortunately don't have the answer to. But let's tie this back in. So basically, because you have the power to choose, to a degree, which environmental stimuli you are subjected to, whether you hang out with, let's say, unambitious or, let's say, destructive people, or with encouraging, loving, forgiving human beings, depending on those decisions, your offspring will have a different life to a degree. And because, you know, the human body is extremely sensitive, you know, your physical memory is enormous. You know, let's say when you were a kid and your mum was cooking some sort of food that you loved, and then, you know, you didn't taste the food for 20 years, and then you walk through the streets and you smell that same food being cooked because it was a really authentic, rare kind of dish. Your body immediately clicks and, like, remembers that smell from when you were a child. Hence, your body has this enormous memory. It absorbs all kinds of stimuli. Every single second of the day, your DNA is kind of absorbing the environmental stimuli to a degree then, and will be stored in the memory of your DNA, which will then be packaged and transferred to your offspring, which will be transferred essentially infinitely onwards. And that's seriously mind-blowing. It is absolutely mind-blowing, because not only do you understand that you're responsible for the rest of your family tree, but also what are you the product of? All the trauma and war and also loving experiences of your ancestors are embodied within you. And that's insane. That makes you respect humans, because what that means is you are a storage of big data. I just came up with that. But you store a lot of data within you, and that is, you're not just your body. You're not just the memory of your age, your years of consciousness that you are alive. You're more than that. That's insane. But now, not only are you influencing the family tree, but also, because I've made other videos on this, talking about the interconnectedness of reality, with every single, I like to describe it like this. Life is like a pool of water, or the universe is like a pool of water, with you in the middle of it. If you move a singular muscle, ripples will be experienced and will occur across the entire pool and will be felt across the entire pool. You are influencing and changing the world with every single action, decision, movement you take. Because you know, if you go out into the street, some small life-changing experience could occur, which seems quite small, but completely shifts the trajectory of the rest of your life. It's universe shifting, essentially. It's difficult to fathom, really. Anyway, so in conclusion, the reason why you are responsible for the DNA of your children is because, depending on the environmental stimuli you experience, your DNA absorbs that and activates different parts of the genome. That's essentially the study of epigenetics. And that track record, the story of your DNA across your life, is stored within the genome and is then transferred onto your children. So if you experience a lot of trauma, that trauma will be embodied within your offspring then, to a degree, and that's an insane realization. And because that means you're really, the decisions you take, the consequences of the decisions you take will be felt potentially infinitely for the rest of time. And that's why you're omnipresent, potentially, to a degree, divine. Anyway, please leave a comment below whether you have ever heard of epigenetics and what you think of it, whether it is real or not. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's scientifically proven that it is real. And whether you think, what the question is, you know, what environmental stimuli are best to nurture your DNA and make them, or whatever. What does your DNA even want that is best? What's the best outcome for your DNA, or what's the best stimuli? Please leave that in the comment and tell me. I'd love to discuss that. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to learn more about self-development, dating, Jungian psychology, and how to reduce suffering in life. Thank you for listening.